Good.
The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. This is the motion of the live things. Welcome to the 6th edition of this annual webinar to evaluate, analyze, and discuss about the gender equality strategies and the measures that have been implemented already in the European screen industries. So I am Alexia Muñoz. I'm the director of the European Women's Audiovisual Network, one of the organizations behind this event, organized in partnership with Europa, with and their sister organization, the Federation of International Actors, the Federation of European Screen Directors, FERA, the EFAD, the European Film Agency Directors Agency, and the research bodies European Observatory for the Audiovisual and the lab Femmes du Cinéma, and our media partner Cineuropa. So thank you very much for being here today. Admin help you navigate through a very quick housekeeping rules. Please, for all the speakers, keep your mics muted. And when it's your time to speak, try not to be very fast so that the work for the interpreters would be facilitated. As I said, there is interpretation for English, French, and Spanish. So find the button down below and you can check the language that you desire. What else? Okay, we expect a very high participation at previous years and would be happy to listen to your questions. But since we expect more than 230 people, please write your questions on the chat side and we'll navigate through them. But keep the questions, keep the chat alive. Okay, a short overview of the agenda today. We will start with the keynote, with the opening. Thank you, Daphne. With the opening words by the member of European Parliament, Emma Rafovich, who is Vice Chair of the Committee of Culture and Education, a member of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. You see, Emma is really engaged in gender equality and culture, and we will be happy to have her here for the second year. Then we will have some the most recent statistics from the European Observatory, presented by Gilles Fontaine. And then we move to the qualitative vision from the lab Femmes du Cinéma. Then we will have some we will have this introduction, an academic perspective by Sabri Derinos. And then we will end, not end, but we will have a panel discussion with Irit Sapet-Seller, Lucia Garcia-Garzón, Agnès Touillet, moderated by Tsevara Irgacheva, and we will have the closing remarks by Bill Anderson, chairman of the Federation of European Screen Directors. So the time is really packed, and yeah, we'll go to the, I think I've gone through everything. And okay, it is my pleasure to introduce the member of the Parliament, Emma Rafovich. Thank you very much, Emma, for being with us for the second year.
Thank you so much for your invitation. I hope you can hear me right. Yeah, I see you all nodding. Sorry, I was a bit late, but I, of course, wanted to say, first of all, that I'm really happy to be with you once again this year. You are obviously really important for me, both in the Cult committee, where I am vice chair, but also in the FEM committee, where we actually yesterday had a big win because we actually had a strong majority for the My Voice, My Choice initiative. So yeah, I just want to share a bit of propaganda before talking about anything else, but we are really happy about that. Of course, I want to thank all of the organizations which made this moment, this discussion between us possible today: the European Women's Audiovisual Network, Europa, the European Films Agency Directors Associations. I think I saw the EFAD connected. So, of course, also the partners of this moment, the International Federation of Actors, the Federation of European Screen Directors, the Lab Femmes de Cinéma, the European Audiovisual Observatory, and Cineuropa. Today's webinar took a close look at a core challenge for the audiovisual industry: how to make real progress on gender equality in European audiovisual sector, audiovisual production especially. Europe may have a strong film tradition and a dynamic production scene, but balance on screen is still far from reality. We're at a point where simply noting the issue isn't enough anymore. We need to turn that awareness into concrete practical steps. To begin with, the numbers speak, of course, for themselves. The 2025 study shows that women are still largely absent from many key creative positions. Barely 24.6% of directors in Europe are women, and the picture isn't much brighter in cinematography, production, or editing. Some countries are expanding their work, such as Austria, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Others are just getting started, with no fewer than 10 countries having launched or planning to launch in the coming years their first gender-based data collection. Yet overall progress remains slow. Female professionals are simply not advancing through the industry as quickly as they should. This challenge is even more pressing today as we navigate a broader climate of backlash. Within European institutions, discussions around equality and representation have grown more polarized, as you know, making it harder to advance issues that were once seen as shared commitments. As history has shown again and again, when political winds shift and the far right gains ground, women and minorities are often the first to face renewed scrutiny and attack. The audiovisual sector is not immune to this dynamic. We can also look beyond Europe to understand the scale of the moment. In the United States, the dismantling of long-standing diversity and inclusion policies signals a broader retreat from equity measures. These developments send shockwaves through creative industries worldwide, reminding us that rights and representation can be rolled back just as quickly as they are won. Against this backdrop, our conversation today is not only relevant, it is an emergency one. Ensuring that women can participate fully and visibly in the audiovisual sector is not simply a professional or artistic concern. It is part of a wider effort to defend democratic values and preserve cultural plurality. So basically, where do we go from here? What's needed and what is to be targeted actions with clear indicators addressing every stage of the professional journey, from education and training to access to opportunities, distribution, and ultimately, of course, recognition. Of course, none of this can be achieved without tackling two persistent issues, structural issues I want to focus on today: the gender pay gap in the audiovisual sector and the ongoing fight against gender-based and sexual violence. But first, I want to delve upon the necessity of challenging content stereotypes and increasing visibility. Achieving equality isn't just a matter of balancing the figures behind the camera. It also requires that the narratives we bring to the screen capture the richness and diversity of women's experiences. Thus, shaping content at early stages, from script editors to development teams and festival selectors, have a key role to play in elevating stories where women are portrayed as complex and multidimensional protagonists. As Brigitte Rollet shows in her book Femmes et Cinéma, Sois belle et tais-toi, Women in Cinema, Be Beautiful and Shut Up, the invisibility of female directors stems from a lack of resources and willingness to recognize them. On the part of public institutions, such as festivals, film schools, museums, and it is therefore a structural problem that is perpetuated in screenplays. Thus, critics, juries, and promotional institutions all contribute to determining what gets noticed and celebrated. but by actively highlighting films and series created by women, they can help ensure this perspective gain the audiences they deserve. Of course, the EU Pay Transparency Directive, because I want to focus clearly on the gender pay gap, stands as a landmark legislation adopted in 2023 to redefine gender pay equality across workplaces in the EU. And it has made it possible to intensify the collection of data on budget differences between films by female and male directors, with a total of 15 countries now doing so. As for combating gender-based and sexual violence, we can see progress, as stated in the qualitative study. The Me Too movement has prompted several film institutes to take initial measures to combat violence in the sector. In 2020, 5 institutes were addressing this issue. In 2025, efforts to combat violence have accelerated significantly. 25 institutes, 21 in 2024, I think, and so yeah, 15. So it goes quite quickly. Are now implementing or preparing concrete actions to address violence in the industry. Once again, Spain obviously is setting an example, as in 2024, the Spanish Ministry of Culture increased the amount of its aid for the fight against gender-based violence and sexual violence in the audiovisual sector, thereby enabling the creation of a prevention and assistance unit. I want obviously to say that we thank all of you for your attention, obviously today, but especially for your commitment to this vital cause. Together, I believe that we can ensure that the European audiovisual industry leads by example, inspiring a new generation of storytellers whose voices reflect the fullness and diversity of our shared continent. And thank you again to the Lab Femmes de Cinéma for their studies and tools, which are so useful in highlighting these inequalities and performances. I will make sure that these numbers will be spread and shared in the European Parliament. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Emma, for your accurate words. And you're right. I mean, the fight is getting larger and larger. Now it's not just visibility, it's always to include the gender-based violence also happening in the visual sector, and of course, gender pay gap. Thank you very much. Now we move to the statistics world. I'm proud to invite here Gilles Fontaine, Head of Department for Marketing Information of the European Audiovisual Observatory. Hello, Gilles.
Hello, good morning. It works. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do a short presentation on the latest data that we collect at the observatory regarding gender equality or inequality in the audiovisual sector. So just sharing the screen. Okay. Maybe before starting with the data, I will just share a short reminder of what we monitor or the data we collect at the observatory regarding gender inequality. We deal with both film and TV fiction production. We have been tracking gender inequality since 2015. We look at 6 creative roles: directors, writers, producers, cinematographers, composers, and editors. We look at all countries which are members of the Council of Europe. And to give you an order of magnitude, this tracking since 2015 represents about 19,000 films and about 42,000 episodes of made-for-TV and or made-for-SVOD fiction episode. So that's what we tracked, and that's what the figures I'm going to share now are based on. I will focus my presentation on theatrical film, but still will at the end give some info about TV fiction as well. But let me first share the latest figure that we have, meaning giving you a 2024 snapshot as regards European films. And when we combine all the six roles that I have been mentioning, the share of women is about 24%, with figures or proportion of women particularly low as regard composers and cinematographers. But even for jobs where women are better represented, and you see it on the slide, screenwriters, producers, and editors, we are only at 31%. So that's the 2024 snapshot. As I said, we have now 10 years of data, enough to have a look and try to see how did the situation evolve over the past 10 years. Well, in a nutshell, the share of women in theatrical films only increased by 4% since 2015. And even more worrying, figures suggest that the slow improvement that started in 2018, I'm sorry, maybe came to a relative halt pretty quickly after 2 or 3 years, and that the proportion of women is stagnating again. So that's what we see when we combine the 6 roles I was talking about. And if we focus on directors, I would say the situation is only very slightly better. But with the same overview, an increase between 2018 and 2021, and rather a stagnation during the most recent years. So that's the raw data for 2024, and also the data on evolution over the last 10 years. And the overall figures are, as you can see, not very pleasing, I must say. I'm going to share some insights beyond this very general data, insight that we can learn from the data. First of all, we looked at debut films because we were making the assumption that maybe gender equality would be here for newcomers among film directors. But that's not really the case. The share of women among debut film directors is indeed higher than on average, 31% versus 25% for all films, but we are still well below 50%. So situation slightly better for debut films, but far from gender equality. That was my first insight into the data. The second insight, to some extent, relates to the film daughter model in Europe, which is still a characteristic of the European film industry. You know that a vast majority of film produced in Europe have the director and the screenwriter as the same person. It means that quite logically, the low share of women among film directors translate in a low share of screenwriter. And you can see that when the screenwriter is not the director of the film, the share of women is higher. So the film daughter model has some implication in terms of gender equality for screenwriters. I would like to discuss budgets, but basically through proxies. So I'm trying to approaching the gender imbalance in budget as we lack recent data for all European countries regarding budget. But there are two ways we can approach the imbalance. The first, for instance, is to focus on the top 100 European films by admissions. And we can make a very reasonable assumption that these top European films have higher budget than on average for all European films. And you can see for this, let's say, European blockbuster, if I may say so, the share of women is lower than for all films. So probably films with higher budget have a lower share of women participating, at least at directors. That's the first way to approach the budget issue. Another way is to look at the genre of the films. and making the difference between documentaries, live action fiction, and animation. And for all categories of jobs, the share of women is much higher in documentaries than it is in live action, in fiction, and in animation. And obviously, the budget of documentaries are on average lower. So that's a second evidence, in my view, that as regard budget, there is an even stronger imbalance than as regard roles themselves. And my fourth insight, and this one is maybe a more positive one, the data we have show that when the director of a film is a woman, the professional in other roles are more likely to be women. So there is a sort of virtual circle here, meaning that progresses in a role, or at least in certain role, has a positive impact on the whole role. It means that if, and that's a big if, the proportion of women among directors keep on increasing, it could have a positive impact on the other roles. All my figures were aggregated at European level, but of course, there are more than nuances. There are strong differences between countries. This table, and I won't go, of course, into the details, show the top 5 countries by share of women in the 6 jobs we follow. What we learn from this table is that some countries actually manage to achieve parity. You see that's the top line of the table. It shows also that the ranking between countries strongly varies between jobs. But it also shows that some countries figure more prominently, generally speaking. And you see countries like Austria, Lithuania, Finland, and Iceland being into the top 5 countries in terms of gender equality in several of the positions. So that's looking at the snapshot in 2024. There is another way to look at the countries. It's to look at the countries which made more progresses since 2015. And in this table, the countries which are marked in orange are the countries which made the more progresses, but which are not yet in the top 5. So it means also that many countries, without still being in the ranking, have been progressing and have been making substantial progresses. So that's rather a sign of hope. It's not only a small group of countries making progress and being at the top, but other countries are also making significant progress toward gender equality. And my final point to conclude is to put in perspective gender equality in theatrical and in TV series. Globally, I would say there are minor differences, but globally the situation is similar in European TV or SVOD fiction production that it is in theatrical film. It is similar both in terms of share of women and in terms of evolution over the recent years. Still going a little bit deeper, if we look at details by roles, the situation is slightly better for writers and producers. First, the proportion is higher for women as regards screenwriting in TV series than in films. And that's maybe because in TV series, the screenwriter is usually not the director. And maybe this has opened more opportunities for women writers. And the second hypothesis I can make is that the proportion is also much higher for producers in TV SVOD fiction than it is in theatrical film. And that's maybe the result of a fast growing market with more opportunities for newcomers. But these are hypotheses, but maybe here again, as I was mentioning before regarding the film d'auteur model, maybe there are some structural differences between the TV and SVOD fiction production and the theatrical film production that explain some of the differences we see as regard gender equality. I'm done with my avalanche of figures. You will find much more in our two reports, one dedicated to film and the other one to TV SVOD fiction. I just would like to conclude on something. We very much focus, and that's for methodological reason, on off-screen diversity, off-screen gender inequality. But many studies suggest that there is a strong relationship between off-screen diversity and on-screen diversity. So I believe that monitoring what's happening in the production of audiovisual work is also relevant to understand inequality on screen film and TV fiction. Happy to take question at a later stage, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jill, for bringing us your reports every year, every term. Yeah, we cannot stop having this information then to being able to leverage to a national level. So now it is my pleasure to bring here the participants of this second study. Fabienne Silvestre and Elena Laquatra, Director and General Coordinator of the Lab Femmes du Cinéma. They will expose the qualitative side of the numbers that the Observatory have already exposed. So to know the existing measures and policies, measures that have been implemented or not in the different countries in Europe. Please, Fabienne, Elena, the floor is all yours here.
Thank you very much, Alexia. Good morning, everybody. We're very glad to be here today on behalf of the Lab Femmes du Cinéma. To start with, I would like to say a big thank you, of course, to all the organizations behind this conference. Over the years, this event has become one of the key annual moments in Europe for discussing gender equality in the film industry. Thanks to the statistics that Gilles Fontaine has just presented, we know exactly where we stand, and unfortunately, we also then know that we're still far from achieving parity. This means that the topic of parity in the cinema industry remains as urgent and necessary as ever. The lab study created in 2016 echoes these figures. It reminds us that data and policies are deeply connected and must move forward together. Two things struck me in Gilles' presentation. Firstly, we maintain the current pace. If we maintain the current pace, gender parity in Europe will not be achieved until 2066. Yes, 2066. It means that we really must prepare our great-grandchildren for that. Secondly, we can sense that a glass ceiling has slowly been put in place, making progress increasingly difficult. As Emma Rafovitz mentioned it, in a global context of backlash on our issues, continuing to highlight the lack of parity year after year is therefore not only an option, it's really a necessity. Let me briefly introduce the lab. The lab is a think tank dedicated to gender equality and diversity in the cinema industry, both behind and in front of the camera. Our work is organized around three main pillars. First, we promote female role models through masterclasses and podcasts. We support industry transformation through workshops organized with collective intelligence tools. And we carry out this annual study designed to raise awareness and influence institutions.
So the starting point is always the same question. Why are women still underrepresented and discriminated in the film industry? Two types of obstacles continue to play a major role. First, gender stereotypes, which influence trust, budgets, visibility, and the very idea of creative genius. Then, structural mechanisms of exclusion, with male networks, underfunding, sexist and sexual violence, and many others. To move forward, we must therefore act on two levels: changing perceptions and telling stories differently, and transforming the rule of the game through strong and ambitious structural measures. Our study documents these policies, supports a committed European network, and reminds us that behind the numbers, there are stories and talents disappearing. And that is exactly why parity matters.
Let me now say a few words about the methodology and objectives of our study. This is a qualitative European study. Every year, we contact national film institutes across Europe. In 2025, 36 countries responded to our questionnaire. I know a lot of them are with us today. Let me tell you a big thank you for your help and your participation. This study is really yours. Then we review the measures they implement and we follow up the progress of initiatives adopted in previous years. It is also a very institutional study conducted in partnership with the EFAD since 2021, and would like to give a very warm thank you to Sevara Ergacheva and Iris Zapel for facilitating our contacts, the French Ministry of Culture, the CNC and EURO-MEI, and since 2020, the European Audiovisual Observatory, whose statistics are essential. Thank you again, Gilles Fontaine and your whole team. Because we know that statistics are the starting point for new policies, and policies are necessary to make statistics evolve. This study is both an annual overview of the situation in Europe and a collection of effective practices. It allows institutes to take a step back and compare their initiative with those that have proved successful elsewhere. But its main purpose is actually to maintain pressure on public authorities, on the media, and on the general public. It is an instrument of influence as much as a communication tool.
Let's now look at the main results of this year's study. I would like to say that, as always, this is only a summary. The full study available on our websites contains detailed information country by country. So, many trends observed in 2024 are continuing. First, diversity is increasingly replacing parity as a central focus. In 2025, 20 institutes have developed initiatives to promote diversity, compared to only 7 in 2020. These actions reflect a stronger desire for intersectionality, because, as we often hear, you cannot claim to make universal films if you only show one face. A good example is Norway, because any applicant to the Norwegian Film Institute must now submit a diversity self-assessment. The aim is to encourage reflection on the inclusivity of projects.
Second, the fight against sexist and sexual violence remains a very central priority. Commitment is increasing, and Mara Rafovitz mentioned it. This year, 25 institutes have implemented measures on this issue, and it was only 5 in 2020. Because an egalitarian set is the first condition for a safe set, and a safe set is the first condition for an egalitarian one. France and Spain continue to be the most proactive countries in this field.
Third, the topic of parenting is gaining visibility. In 2020, only 2 countries were working on these issues. In 2025, 7 institutes are now developing measures. And it is a key lever, because studies show that parenthood penalizes women more strongly in the labor market. Then, supporting parents directly contributes to creating more equal creative conditions.
Fourth, financial incentives remain crucial: bonuses, quotas, calls for projects for women. Because quite simply, when funding changes, film change. Spain is, however, still the only European country to apply full quotas. systematically allocating part of its budget to films directed or written by women. Other countries prefer moderate or hybrid quotas. Several institutes have developed financial incentives, including France with the CNC's Gender Equality Bonus. However, as announced in kind by its president, the bonus will be transformed next year into a penalty, and this will probably be a significant shift for producers.
Fifth, the gender pay gap remains a major challenge. Progress is expected thanks to the EU directive requiring companies with more than 100 employees to publish salary data and act when gaps exceed 5%. For the second year, we ask institutes about this issue. We can say that 9 countries collect gender pay gap data across film professions, and 15 countries collect data on budget disparities between films directed by women and by men.
2 new trends have emerged this year. The first concerns gender balanced governance, which appeared as a logical prerequisite for more equality. Because if decision-making rooms are unbalanced, of course, decision will be as well. Some countries have already established parity rules. Others struggle to maintain them each year. In 2025, only 9 countries have gender-balanced governance structures, particularly in funding committees, management positions, and festival juries.
The second new trend is the introduction of monitoring indicators to evaluate and adjust policies. After years of implementing measures, some countries now want to assess their results. For example, in 2024, the Norwegian Film Institute considered many diversity objectives achieved and now aims to consolidate progress with the new evaluation tools. These indicators will help institutions reinforce what works, revise what doesn't, and design new measures.
There are also emerging signals to keep in mind. First, the use of artificial intelligence tools to promote equality for data collection and objectifying inequalities. Denmark is developing an AI system to measure on-screen representation, for example.
Second, training on cognitive bias is becoming a new lever for change. 3 film institutes have created internal training programs for their employees. In the Netherlands, for example, these courses focus on unconscious bias and the concept of situated knowledge.
Third, gender equality is increasingly integrated into broader sustainability strategies. This idea is clear. An inclusive industry is also a responsible industry. In France, for example, the CNC has introduced a CSR bonus of 28,000 euros this year. To receive it, production must meet criteria related to inclusion, gender equality, and quality of life at work. So let's move to the conclusion. So here we are. Despite long-term creative policies across Europe, the figures continue to progress at such a slow pace that at this rate, again, parity will only be achieved by the time of our great-grandchildren are born. And even in countries where gender parity is supposed to be the most culturally established, the proportion of women filmmakers still doesn't rise above 36%. Can we be happy about this? Well, of course not. And now, on top of that, we are facing a backlash that is spreading quietly almost everywhere. So yes, the picture for gender parity in Europe in 2025 is not a bright one. The fight we are leading together for more women behind the camera is long, it's frustrating, but it seems to be more necessary than ever. Because this is not only about fairness, as Emma Rafovitz again said it, it's about creativity and even about cultural democracy. As long as women are underrepresented, Europe is depriving itself of an entire world of imagination. Next year, our study will turn 10 years, a perfect moment to take stock and above all to act. And we will. Together, people from the industry, associations, institutions, press, academic sector, with determination and with a range of measures that will only have an impact if we push them forward at the same time and together. Again, a warm thank you to the European Audiovisual Observatory, especially Jean Fontaine and Agnès Schneeberger. Gilles, it has been such a pleasure to work with you all this year. The EFAD, especially Sevara Irgacheva and Iris Zappeheller, Europa, notably Daphne Tepper, and the EWA network for organizing this event. The study of the lab is available online. Please read it, share it, and use it. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabienne, Elena. Okay, yeah, it's quite a harsh perspective, 2066. Yeah, the data are progressing, but this progress is really, really, really slow. Okay, now it's time to move to a Q&A. Perhaps we can engage with some of the questions that have been placed here. Also invited Gilles or anyone who wants to come on board. I think Gilles has already asked. I mean, he has replied some comments here, like the studies that back the idea that on-screen representation and inclusion, I mean, it's been affected for the off-screen one. And also there's an interested question here by Juliana Ugrin. Don't you think that the role of women in cinema is related to the size of budgets? Since women are, of course, trusted with lower budgets, we know that. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, what I just can say perhaps is that of course the situation of women is very much linked to the budget allowed to the film they direct, of course. And I can also add that this is a question, I mean, you don't make the same film depending on the budget you've got. And of course, also this is a question linked to also role model, because we know that, you know, for example, the main award ceremonies, you know, the voters are the people are generally professional. I think to the César in France, for example. And 2 years ago, we had the situation that there were many huge films directed by women, but the voters again was the professional, and at the second stage of the vote, it appeared that there were no woman director, you know, nominated for the awards. And this is really a scandal. And I really make a link between the fact that when the people vote, you know, generally you vote very quickly, and then you vote very quickly to the film you have heard more about. And, you know, the people, you know, made it, of course. And then it's also a question of budget of marketing and of, you know, advertising. And if the budget of a woman, a film directed by a woman, is lower, then there will be less budget for marketing. And then at the end, the voters don't think about them, and then there's no women at that stage, you know. And it's really a pity for young girls, you know, who see the ceremony on screen and they just think that this is not, you know, positions that are open to women. So
yeah, it's a vicious circle. So perhaps the elephant in the room is, should the organizations make sure that the people who vote have already seen the contenders? Because that's the big thing.
But that will be very interesting to hear from Austria, because I know that they focus their measures on budgeting, and I'm sure that Daphne will tell us about more later on.
That's great. Also, one of the comments here really calls exactly on it's one of the conclusions you have in the study. Like, what about the gender of the decision makers, the commissioning bodies? Yes, of course, there must be a full strategy of gender governance. in order to implement the gender policies. Because if there's no parity in the selections that are going to curate and allocate funds in the festival, so it's difficult then to achieve the good results for women filmmakers.
Yeah, I just want to say that it was quite a surprise for us to see that I think it's only in 9 countries that there are some, you know, some policies that are very clearly explained about this. I'm sure that most of the countries, you know, have policy regarding parity in the committees, but only 9, you know, said, you know, presented as something that they do systematically. And of course, it's a question that occurred at, you know, in the commission which decide the attribution of the subsidies. But you're right. It's also a question in the festival and in the festival juries and in the festival selection committees. And it's interesting that, you know, the institutes who give subsidies to festivals can measure, you know, the implication of festivals regarding this question.
Yeah, perhaps next year, instead of 9, we will have, I don't know, 15, 20. That could
Hopefully,
be,
yes.
that would be good if they can really mirage on the other agency that are implementing those measures. Gilles.
Yes, no, about budget, just insisting again on the fact that documentaries and live action should be looked at differently. I mean, and documentaries account for 1/3, basically, of theatrical film produced in Europe. So the main issue is with live action, and to some extent, the average figures that I have presented hide a much more severe situation as regard live action and also as regard animation. So there is a need also to go into the details, not the same budget. It seems to be easier for a documentary writer to carry a home project and then direct it, but it will be with a very small budget. All this is hidden between the overall figures.
Thank you very much. Also, to reply a comment here in the chat, the reports from the European Observatory are already available in the website. So the 2 main reports that Gilles shared the screen, and also the study from Le Lab. Okay, now we move to the academic perspective, and Sabri Derinos from the University of Leuven, Saint-Louis, Bruxelles will... Hello, Sabri.
Hello. Hey. Thank you, Alexia. Thank you for having me today, and thank everyone for the impressive pieces of work that you've produced. There is so much to say and so little time, so I'll make it short. So I'll try to. I'll briefly introduce myself. I have a hybrid profile because I do research, but I also did a lot of practice. I've approached audiovisual equality and diversity policies from different angles. For example, as an EDI consultant for media organizations, but also working for the audiovisual regulator, for journalist unions and Minister of Media. But I mostly do research. And my personal work as a researcher sits at the crossroad of sociology of public problems, media studies, and critical diversity studies. So what it means, in other words, is that I focus on understanding how issues related to equality and diversity are appearing and circulating in the public discourse, with the perspective that the way of framing a problem has an effect on the design of the solution. So first, a word about the context of the studies. We are in the best context possible for developing equality policies. In the last year, we saw the expansion of anti-discrimination frameworks across Europe. Equality itself became a recognized public topic, and we saw the rising of the Me Too movement that triggered a worldwide reaction that reshaped agendas across sectors, including audiovisual production. So issues related to equality, such as violence, representation, stereotypes, and workplace inequalities, for example, entered the mainstream. These were not marginal discussions anymore, so they became part of a public debate and appeared in a large variety of spheres. And most of the public and private actors agreed that there is an issue on equality. There is a problem of inequality on screen and off screen. So it led to public policies as well as companies' policies to reach equality. But yet, we saw progress remained extremely limited. Despite this favorable context, progress was modest. And we saw all these numbers. We are still very far from equality, and changes remain limited. And number don't show everything, because reaching 50% is supposed to be like the first stage. With this number, we don't see the complexity of the system and the diversity of the situations that are part of that system of inequality. So of course, there is a real utility of measuring and developing indicators for policies and to set the agenda, but it can also have unintended effects when people focus more on answering KPIs without having more holistic understanding of the phenomenon. And it can lead to a false sense of problem solving that can create other problems or hide some problems. So regarding the effectiveness of policies themselves, a lot of studies show that many equality policies simply do not produce the intended effect. And I think the fundamental question is do these policies actually target the most important stakes? Because often they focus on the individual when the problem is more systemic or structural, and they soften the consequences instead of tackling the causes. And they set priorities and allocate resources that are maybe not adapted to the needs. And the other question, maybe it's a bit provocative, but are these policies designed to really change the system? Because these policies are always a consequences of a balance of power at a specific moment. So people who design these policies usually occupy themselves positions of power and end with similar profiles. And when they create these policies, most of the time it's kind of protect the status quo, or at least do not really challenge it. So they would not develop policies that would maybe put them in really uncomfortable situation, right? So sometimes you can see people that act with a sense of balance, being moderated or neutral, but defending the status quo is not neutral. It is an ideological position. It maintains the existing situations of power and the hierarchy that's beneath it. So a word about the relationship between equality policies and broader frameworks. It appeared in the study about the public policies. So there is this mix with the diversity policies. So if diversity policies were more intersectional approach of the issues of equality, it would be nice, of course. But what the literature sees, the scientific literature sees about diversity and diversity policies is mostly the use of a vague, blurry words that means everything and nothing at the same time. It might lead to a dilution of the key stakes, such as racism, for example, or sexism, with a selection of policies targeting categories a la carte based on the opportunities with few or poor fundamental changes. And the same dynamic can appear with CSR or ESG, for example. We can see often that corporate discourse can shape the framing of the issue, sometimes reducing complex system inequalities to unpoliticized discourses that lead to unadapted responses. So the central idea that I will reflect on today is the sustainability of these equality policies. Is there any resilience or robustness about these policies? Because we were in the best context possible, right, for developing equality policies. But what about now? What about the future? So in public policies, the key question is, do these equality mechanisms have strong legal foundations? Are they laid in laws, or do they depend on maybe the will of ministers or government, or the action of administration? Maybe it's just a temporary political choice. So how long these policies can resist to the conservative backlash that we are witnessing across Europe and the world? And this is for public policies, but for private companies' policies also, the same applies. There was a trend, of course, of adopting DEI, CSR, ESG frameworks, etc. But will this continue in the coming years? I mean, there is maybe an inertia, a corporate culture inertia. For now, a lot of companies still do this kind of policy, but in the next year, I'm not sure. The political context and business constraints reshape priorities quickly, and the market power and the realist decisions aligned with shareholder expectation may reduce commitments to equality. So we have equality policies that did not or barely work in the best moment for changes, and now we are heading the worst period. So what does it mean, of course? I think that something really important is to understand the current balance of power, because some critical diversity scholars currently remind us that the situation is not a simple confrontation between the progressive people who want equality versus the conservative people who want to preserve their privileges. It's more complex than that, because these issues are start from the bottom, you know. So it's minoritized groups with different equality and minority rights that rarely reach position of institutional power, right? So they try to defend this position, and sometimes these discourses reach some people in position of power, and when they do, they are more likely to be maybe reframed or softened by those people in position of power. And limited policies are developed, probably with minimal impact, and mostly addressing symptoms rather than structures, and not challenging the status quo. It makes sense, right? And even this minimal change is already perceived as too much by the other side, by the conservative forces engaged in so-called culture wars. So I think this is the actual balance of power we are dealing with. The kind of status quo versus conservative backlash. So I'm not really optimistic about that. But I think that, and I want to conclude with that, I want to underline the key role of the civil society, you know, NGOs, grassroots groups, collectives, individuals that organizing together to push this issue into public debate. That they are really, really important, because they keep on coming, and this is a lot of work, and often hidden work, and this is a key element that make it possible to have this issue set on the agenda and have changes. They are the engine of change, and this is precisely why they are increasingly targeted also by reduced funding for association in a lot of countries, reduction of freedom, and attempts to delegitimize their voice. So if we care about equality, I think that it is essential to support them, listen to them, of course, and protect their rights. So I will be really happy to hear the following debate, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sabri. Now I pass the floor to Sevara Irgacheva, Secretary General of the EFAD, to continue the last part of the seminar.
Thank you so much, Alexia, and thank you everybody to being here, and thank you, Sabri, for this extremely important and interesting context, because also it will be important to put in context the discussion that we're about to have, which will focus on the European Film Agency's members' initiatives in terms of gender equality and and the audiovisual sector, obviously. So I'm very happy to be moderating this discussion today, and I'd like to introduce our speakers. Iris Zabeheller, you are Deputy Director of the Austrian Film Institute, and you are also the Chair of EFAD Gender and Inclusion Working Group. So you are driving force of this topic within the organization. We also have Lucia Garcia Garzon, who is head of unit at the Institute of Cinematography and Audiovisual Arts in ICA from Spain, who also has a particularly interesting perspective to share with us, because Spanish approach to gender policy is quite unique, also in terms of quotas. And we have Agnès Touillot. You are Deputy Secretary General in the Centre National de Cinématographie et de l'Image Animée in France. And we also have some extremely interesting perspective on the way of changing of paradigms in terms of approaching gender equality policies. So to start quickly, I'd like each of you to quickly present strategies that were put in place in each respective countries. Of course, conscious of time, focus on one or two measures that you believe were particularly the most impactful in this regard. Iris, would you like to start?
Hello, hi, yeah, thank you for having me here. And as Austria has been mentioned during the presentations on several occasions, I would like to pick out those measures that I think that are the most impactful ones. Even though, but I'll come to that a little later. So we started to work on gender balance in 2013, and at that moment we had approximately a quarter of the films made by female directors, but they were getting only 12% of the money of the support that we were given. So we said this has to be shared equally. It took us quite some time to install what we call today the gender budgeting, but this is something that is written in our law. So in fact, we should have done this since quite some time, but we started in 21, I think, or 2023. No, I don't know. 3-4 years ago, and it's quite simple. It says that the money that we are given has to be shared equally between men and women. So we are focusing on the three key positions: production, script writing, and directing. And we are creating what we call virtual female and virtual male accounts. And the money each project is asking for is shared according to women or men in those three positions. And when the money is attributed to the projects, it has, in theory, we should be at 50-50. The thing is, in the very first year, so in 23, we had 51% of the money given to female-driven projects. In 24, we were at 44%. And in 25, it was this famous backlash, and we are back to 41, except if we are taken into consideration, because in Austria, we can take a little money out of the next year's budget. And if we take those projects into consideration, we are at 46, but we are not at 50-50, because this is the aim. And we heard that it is really important to have gender equality behind the camera and on screen. And the second measure we have implemented in 2017 is the incentive funding. So every time a project that is getting support from the Austrian Film Institute for production is reaching a certain amount of points, because there are women working as head of departments within this project, they are getting another 30,000 euro for the development of a next project, script development or development, if there are women in the key positions. Yeah, I will stop here for the for the moment, because I have to add that the incentive funding showed very quick raise of women in almost all the departments except for DOP, as Gilles' statistics showed.
Thank you, Iris. And indeed, the element of funding is important. Also, as Emma Afrovic just mentioned, we're not looking for specific numbers just for the numbers. We want to have the more the diversity of female experiences represented on screen, and actually numbers and quotas are also sometimes part of it. So, Lucia, why don't you enlighten us on the Spanish perspective?
Yeah, hello everyone. So just take into account that I'm talking about a specific grant, even though it's quite similar to the rest of the lines that we have here in the Institute of Cinematography. There are three main ones. The quotas that some people have mentioned before. These were first launched in 2020. And in that case, we started to allocate 35% of our grants to projects which were directed by women, and this increased to 40% in 2022. Then we have the points that every project gets. These were already, there were somehow since 2009 in our calls, but we have been giving more points as the time passes, and especially we have been more strict when it comes to the head departments that have to be filled with women. So nowadays the situation is that 11 out of 50 of the objective points that we give to the projects come from different positions held by women. That's the case of director, executive producer, screenwriter, extra point when both screenwriter and director are women. And then we give 3 points if 40% of the heads of technical and artistic departments are filled with women. And the third measure, I will then give a little overall of how is it working. But the third measure is that we consider projects that are directed by a woman as difficult work, so we can raise the intensity of the aids that are allowed by the European Union to 75%, instead of the general rule of 50 or 60%. I cannot share with you the data because I was preparing it, but it's not really reliable. We don't have strong data before 2018, which is when the main changes start developing. So, but I will say that what we see is that there is a strong, let's say, presence of women, taking into account that we say a strong presence from 40 to 60%, consider this parity. In all the calls, in all the years since 2018. And it sucks a little bit because we don't see a huge increase in the presence of women. But I think this is because before 2020, these roles could be shared with men. So what people, we think, used to do is, okay, let's try to get the points. Let's try to get the qualification of difficult work. So we just take a woman and we put it there. But there is always a man by her side who is really the leader of the project. So you cannot see a huge difference before 2020, 2018 to nowadays. But now we don't accept roles that are shared by men. So we only give the points. We only consider projects directed by women when it's only a woman who is in charge. So I think that's the main difference. And that's why the impact of especially the points that we give is not as big when you see the data.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And indeed, the issue of tokenization of women is actually a big topic, because even if you look at the biggest awards worldwide, you can also see that quite often when women are awarded, whether it's best director or anything, half of the time it's a joint project. So addressing this issue is something that is innovative, and it would be interesting to follow up and see at one point how the results continue, even if we're now operating in a context that is more in the context of backlash, as it was previously mentioned. And to counteract this backlash, I know that from the CNC side, there has been a change in paradigm, and we would like to hear also about that. So Agnès, please, the floor is yours.
Bonjour, moi je vais parler en français puisqu'on a la chance d'avoir une traduction. En fait, là, la question que tu m'avais posée, c'était plutôt les principales mesures sur l'égalité. Donc, je pensais qu'on parlerait après de cette histoire de changement de paradigme qui va certainement tous bien vous intéresser. Donc, sur les mesures, vraiment les principales mesures en faveur de la parité, je pense que ce qui est très important à dire, c'est que nous, on a un observatoire de la parité depuis 2014. Donc, tout ce qu'on se dit tout à l'heure sur l'importance des chiffres, pour nous, on conçoit ça vraiment comme quelque chose de très important, justement, pour pouvoir mettre en place nos politiques publiques. Et donc, cet observatoire, c'est un observatoire permanent qui produit des données tous les ans, que vous pouvez trouver sur notre site internet. Et on a des statistiques sur l'emploi, sur les salaires et sur les aides attribuées aux femmes. Et puis l'autre mesure pour laquelle on est connu vraiment pour parler que des principales, c'est le bonus parité qu'on a mis en place depuis 2019. C'est un bonus de 14,21%. En fait, c'était un 15% qui, après un rabot, est devenu 14,21%. On a parlé de la baisse des budgets en général. Donc voilà, ces budgets-là n'échappent pas au problème. Donc c'est un système de barème de points. Donc chaque poste clé correspond à un certain nombre de points selon l'esthétique. Donc c'est un peu complexe, mais ce qui est très simple, c'est qu'on donne un point par femme à un poste majeur, et on n'attribue pas le point si ce n'est pas une femme. Donc, pour parler de films que vous connaissez peut-être, des films qui ont bénéficié du bonus récemment, on a par exemple All We Imagine as Light de Payal Kapadia, ou Nouvelle Vague de Richard Linklater, ou Anatomie d'une chute de Justine Triet. Ce qu'on peut voir, c'est que, et ça on en a parlé, la majorité des films qui bénéficient du bonus, 58,4%, sont réalisés par des femmes. On a parlé tout à l'heure d'un cercle vertueux, c'est ce qu'on voit ici. Voilà pour les principales mesures.
Merci Agnès, thank you. And now my brain doesn't know in what language to speak, so sorry. It's important to note indeed that there's 58% of films that were directed by women that benefited from the bonus. And can you say if there is also a specific impact on other other roles, d'autres postes. Maybe it's because we touched briefly on the directors, but then also the OPs, etc. So
the impact of the bonus, you want to know?
Yes.
Oui, en fait, c'est des postes. C'est des postes de chef de poste, en fait, des principaux chefs de poste. Ce qu'il y a, c'est que là, pour un exposé court, c'est difficile de vous exposer l'ensemble de ces postes, parce que, comme je vous ai dit, c'est différent selon les critiques. Si on est sur le genre animation, évidemment, ça va être des postes différents que si on est sur un film de fiction, si on est sur le documentaire aussi. Mais voilà, c'est vraiment les chefs de poste avec l'idée, effectivement, certes que ça fait ça ouvre la voie pour des postes à responsabilité pour les femmes, mais aussi, on le sait, et c'est documenté, comme on travaille par équipe, une équipe dirigée par des femmes comportera plus de femmes qu'une équipe dirigée par un homme. Donc ça a cette vertu-là aussi, ouvrir des postes à responsabilité, mais aussi globalement faire travailler plus de femmes dans des métiers parfois plus techniques aussi.
Thank you so much, Agnès, for this additional information. And I think it's really important in all the contexts we're looking at that we don't only have to look at women directors on one side, and we don't only need to look on purely the budget side or the collaboration between men and women, but that in any case we have to have an absolutely holistic approach through the policies to make sure that there is some type of impact. So there was another element we were considering to look into, and it resonates with one of the comments that I've seen in the chat. It's the wider evolution and integration of gender equality policies towards something that is larger when we talk about diversity and inclusion, sometimes with an intersectional perspective, but also an ESG approach. And of course, it's interesting to see how does it fit in with the global approach, gender policies versus promotion of good working conditions, sustainability, or mental health. And I think it's important to realize that, yes, the criticism can be justified, but the reasoning behind this approach in order to make sure that we have this holistic approach in terms of gender works out. So can you have a comment on this, please? Iris, do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, I think it is really important to have this big picture in front of us. I can understand that it might be felt as a burden for some production companies, but I think the more they get information on how things can be integrated, the more they see it as an opportunity. So in Austria, for example, we do have this code of ethics because we had to install one in 21. You remember the Me Too wave when it arrived in Austria. And we are working very closely with the industry, with the Austrian Filmmakers Association, namely. And I think this is very important to work together on one hand with the politics and on the other hand with the industry. I think this is really important to have this integration. And so we are. We also do have an advice center, which is called We Do, and this is very important. They are not only taken in calls of people who had to live with problems during their work, but they are also offering workshops which are normally done during the warm-up when a film starts, to make people aware of the fact that that there might be situations. And the very important thing within the Code of Ethics is that it is really clearly mentioned that it's the producers who are responsible if there is something happening during the shooting and pre-shooting and so on. And in the worst case, which nobody wants to take place, is that they have to pay back the money they are getting from the different film centers, even from the national TV. So everybody wants to avoid this, and therefore everybody is working together on the prevention of those cases. And I think this is really important.
Thank you, Iris. Lucia, Spanish perspective?
Yeah. So actually, we have very recently started doing some things, and it's one of these things I think that even though it's in the agenda, it's always a little bit at the end of the agenda because there are so many practical things every day that need to be solved. But what they from the direction of the ICA, what they have already done since 2020, they have a guide for the companies, which is full of good practices and prevention of risk, lower risk at work, and also from the mental health and social perspective. What I can think of in our little department is we try to protect, but we collide a lot of times with laboral legislation and some other departments. So from our little corner, what we try to do is trying to get people who is working in the project and is helping the project to get grants to be well treated, let's say. And this actually it's how do you say that? Applied by making companies pay the screenplayers and some other roles before they can even get the grant. Because I don't know if that's the case in other countries, but in Spain, there was identification of the screenplayers being one of the roles that were treated not so well, or depending on how the project went. So we try to make them feel more secure by this kind of measure.
Thank you, Lucia. And we know how this is also connected to the gender balance, because indeed women also being socialized, and as women would sometimes be less conducive or less heard, actually, by even if they are engaged in their rights, they are less heard by the employer. So it's an important measure to mitigate it. Agnès, from the French perspective?
Oui, sur ce sujet, je pense qu'on peut quand même parler de toute la politique de lutte contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles qu'on a mise en place en France. Quand on parle de good working conditions, je pense qu'on y a aussi, hein, évidemment. L'idée, c'est de créer quand même des lieux de travail beaucoup plus sûrs, hein, pour tous, mais certes pour les femmes aussi, hein. Donc nous, j'ai déjà partagé ces informations ici, mais bon. Donc nous, c'est depuis le 1er janvier 2021 qu'on conditionne nos aides, toutes les aides du CNC, on fait que l'employeur des entreprises de production suivent une formation contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles, la formation mise en place par le CNC. Donc on le fait pour tous les producteurs, distributeurs, vendeurs, dans le jeu vidéo, la création numérique, le cinéma, l'audiovisuel, tout le champ couvert par le CNC qui est vraiment large, et les exploitants de salles de cinéma. Ce qu'on voit, c'est qu'on a quand même formé 7000 employeurs depuis 2021. Donc là, on réapprend en fait des règles de droit du travail qui sont certes très focusées sur la lutte contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles, mais cependant, ça rappelle quand même les obligations que l'employeur est responsable de la santé et de la sécurité au travail, encore des choses très générales qui sont en bénéfice de toute façon aux salariés. Et puis, depuis le 1er janvier 25, on est monté quand même un gros cran plus loin, puisque maintenant, on conditionne également au cinéma pour l'instant, et puis en juin 26 à l'audiovisuel, à la formation des équipes de tournage. Donc, c'est une formation en 2 temps, d'abord en distanciel et ensuite sur le tournage. Mon but, c'est d'avoir des collectifs entiers, donc c'est une politique pour 3 ans, d'avoir des collectifs de travail complètement formés ensemble sur ces questions de lutte contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles, mais encore une fois, ça rejoint le sujet général de la santé et la sécurité au travail, de meilleures conditions de travail. Là, vous voyez les chiffres, on monte vraiment d'un cran très élevé, c'est qu'il y a quand même 13 000 personnes qui ont suivi la première partie de la formation en distance et qu'on a eu 117 formations sur les tournages depuis janvier. Hein. C'est environ 200 films de cinéma par an qui sont aidés. Donc, voilà. Et ça fait 4000, presque 4500 personnes qui ont suivi une formation avec leurs collègues sur le tournage. Donc, je pense que voilà, ça répond un peu à cette question parce que c'est un sujet majeur, on a largement parlé, mais ça fait effectivement partie de cette idée de travailler dans de meilleures conditions, les conditions.
Thank you, Agnès. And
Ah ouais,
just to the attendees, there is a translation channel in English. There's simultaneous interpretation that is provided. You can get it in the commands. Okay, so conscious of time, we're going to be wrapping up. And now the point is actually, what are the next steps? So we have seen that some measures were effective, some others way less, and we also see some drop in women-led projects, in women participation, and that also, of course, reflects on women on screen. So what are the next steps for film funds in enhancing gender equality? What are you putting in place, including any type of gaps such as financing, unconscious bias, and potentially new areas of action to keep pushing for finally at one point, maybe before 2200 achieving gender equality? I will start in the same round. So Iris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I think it is really important to have the industry on board. And therefore, we are working or we are installing a community-based working group to integrate them and to know exactly what are their needs and what measures would help them to be more seen and to get easily to funds. And I think it's very important to have standards, because when we started to talk, for example, about intimacy coordination, there were so many people popping up and offering their work. But I think we need a certain standard to know what or who might be called, for example, intimacy coordinator or a person of trust on set. So this is something we are working on. And the most important thing is still data. We need data, we saw it so much. It worked so well for gender balance, and we do need this for all underrepresented groups. This is, of course, very difficult to get and very sensitive. But we are working together with the Hamburg Film Fund, Moin, who are about to install, or they already did install Omni, which is a tool where you can collect data on an anonymous basis and on a voluntarily basis. And I think this is really the most important thing. And we are going to install this program from next year on to see where there is more work to do. We have an idea, but we know that figures do help to get this installed.
Thank you so much, Charis. Lucia?
Yeah, thank you. In our case, we are trying to work towards avoiding the feminization of roles just because of the feminization of roles. So as I said, we have been being more specific about the roles that will get points. We have been trying to stress out the more technical roles, apart from the more artistic roles where women were better ahead of. Then we are recently starting discussions on how to avoid the use of women in certain positions only to get the points. I've seen that there are comments saying that sometimes the fact that a role is shared by a man and a woman don't mean that they are using the woman only to get points. This is of course true, but we also see and you can see that in the documentation they present to us in the calls very easily for screenwriters. You can see that what is being paid to the woman when it's the only position we give points, even though it's shared with a man. And you can see there in the contracts that what the man is getting paid and the woman is getting paid. Not always, of course, but a lot of times it's very different. So that leads us to think that the part that the woman is taking in that writing is a little bit symbolic, let's say. And then the media, the amount of budgets. We have just recently finished one of our calls, and there is still a difference between, of course, the projects that are directed by men and the projects that are directed by women. It's not a huge difference because already these grants are given to projects that are small, that are more difficult, more artistic, more already where the presence of women may be a little bit better than in the most mainstream projects, but still there is a difference of almost 60,000-70,000 euros when the project is presented by a man and the project is presented by a woman. So this would be the three main aspects that we will be working on.
Thank you, Lucia. And to paraphrase a little bit, not all double-led projects, but every time somebody is not being paid enough, it's a woman most of the time. So, okay. Thank you. Agnès? And I think we're going to go to my favorite topic of the malus parité, finally.
Oui. Alors nous, peut-être que Daphné, si tu peux partager les chiffres là, pour aller vite, on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. Donc en fait, grâce à notre observatoire, et c'est ce que je disais, c'est super important d'avoir on veut mener une politique publique. On voit malheureusement qu'en fait, on a un recul, donc on a parlé de bonus, hein, on a un recul des films éligibles en fait. On a vu un effet, semble-t-il, pendant quelques années, un tassement, et maintenant c'est un véritable recul. Donc voilà, c'est l'intérêt des gens de voir l'effet de nos politiques et s'il n'en a plus, il faut qu'on change notre politique effectivement. Donc comme l'a déjà évoqué Fabienne et comme Sévara avait très envie aussi de l'évoquer, on change là complètement de paradigme et on va travailler maintenant à un l'idée, voilà, c'est que maintenant, on ne va pas récompenser un effort fait de femmes à des postes importants. On considère que la parité, c'est une obligation. Et elle est légale, d'ailleurs, c'est une obligation dans le texte en France. Donc, si on ne l'attend pas, eh bien, à ce moment-là, un malus qui s'applique. Donc là, notre objectif pour l'instant, on s'est donné 1 an pour travailler dessus. Et donc, le malus, il entrera en vigueur en janvier 27. Voilà, le temps là de garder, le temps de les travaux, on garde notre bonus cette année. Et puis, on passera en 2027 à un système de malus qu'on va travailler et qu'on va travailler aussi avec les partenaires sociaux en France, évidemment.
Merci Agnès. I think we can unshare the screen. Thank you. Merci beaucoup Agnès. And it's an interesting notion and probably also very important right now where you do not consider that equality, gender equality deserves a cookie, but it's like a basic perspective of a balanced approach to creation and to work. And conscious of time, I will wrap it up here. I had one last, but let's move on. And thank you so much for these considerations. So there is still possibility to ask a question, and I see one. Are there specific measures targeted at television production in particular? Because the person was under the impression that there were measures introduced in France a few years ago. But is there any specific television measures in place that you would like to highlight? Are they different than the specifically film industry? I know that the question was directed to France specifically, so Agnès, maybe if you want to answer that. If you're still with us, because I see your screen is black. I think Agnès maybe is experiencing technical issues, so I don't know, Iris or Lucia, are there any specific measures specifically directed to television?
From my part, we only do cinema, so I cannot say anything.
And
yeah, it's the same in Austria, but we know that the figures for the TV are worse than those for cinema, and therefore it would be really good. But I think the ORF, who is the only public television in Austria, is about to take measures, and hopefully we will see how they will work.
Thank you. And to complement, public service media, indeed, in certain member states do have specific obligations in terms of gender equality, and it will be different regarding the productions that are commissioned or are productions by the broadcasters or those that they have to acquire as well. And without further ado, considering that we ran over, I'd like to pass the floor to Bill Anderson, who is a screen director and the chairman of FERA, the Federation of European Film Directors, for the closing speech. So please, Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Severa. I'd just like to thank everyone, for this fantastic annual rigor of data that you all provide, which give us such insight into gender parity. As Severa said, I'm a working screen director, and I'm a very, very amateur statistician. But I'd like to do my best on that. And I'd like to look at, because female directors, it does seem there is some optimism about them being able to shift the dial and be as creative leaders of audiovisual production. They can change things, albeit slowly. I wanted to look at the entry into the profession because and look at film schools, because I think it's well known that roughly 44% of film school graduate directors are female. So there is no shortage of so-called qualified female directors around. I mean, there's no doubt about that. 44%. It's not quite 50, but it's very present. And yet we have from 44% of film school female graduates, we go down to 24.6% of directors. And this is sometimes referred to charmingly as the leaky pipeline. And I was at film school, I mean, a million years ago. And now from the perspective of a sort of grizzled industry professional, all graduates from film school face a perception problem from the industry, because what the industry looks at them and they go, these kids, young people, all of them, whatever their gender, they're full of creative ideas, and that's absolutely wonderful, and they've got things to say, but they have absolutely no experience of the cruel, harsh, unforgiving industrial machine that is film production. And, you know, can we trust any of them in charge of €1 million budgets to be able to deliver these great things that they want to say? And I think that, you know, a word that often comes up in the industry is that what the environment these creative voices are walking into is military. It's a military environment whereby you have to be able to deliver, you know, resources and all this kind of thing on a huge scale. And the second we hear the word military applied to film production or quasi-military, it's really bad news. Because if we look at the real military in the European Union, and we look at female involvement in the military, it's about 10% across the EU. It varies enormously. It's 20% in Sweden and it's 4% in Austria, but roughly 10%. And if you look at the issues that the gender parity fighters in the military are looking at, they are identical to our issues, absolutely identical, just worse on every score. And I think that for me, my own experience of this military comparison happened once when I was shooting on a set, and we were in a location which was in the gift of a brigadier, an army brigadier, and he could shut us down at any moment. And we were filming away, and this man came and stood next to me for half an hour, watching everything that was going on like a hawk, and it was completely unnerving. And at the end of the half an hour, I said to him, how's it going for you? Are you okay? I mean, are we doing all right? And he said, yes. So I've been watching you very closely, and said, basically, what you do is identical to what we do. He said, the set is like a battlefield because you need resources to arrive ready for shooting. If they arrive too soon, they're in the way. If they arrive too late, it's a disaster. And the person who is running those resources, the director in your case, or the officer in our case, has to be able to use those resources instantly without hesitation. They must know what they're going to be used for. They must know what the plan is. And he said, in the military, we have a margin of error time of 2 hours. And he said, I've been calculating what yours is on a film set. And I said, all right. He said, yeah, it's 15 minutes. You have to do it with 8 times more precision than we do in the military. And my reply to him was, we're not the same as you, because we do not have to be prepared to sacrifice people's lives. We're just telling stories. Sometimes when you're trying to make a creative decision, it feels like a matter of life or death, but it isn't. And I think we need to decouple film production from its perception as a quasi-military activity, because strength, courage, and tactical resilience are not the monopoly of a patriarchal military. And I think that we have to focus at FERA and other organizations on working conditions on set. We have to demilitarize it, this perception, because if it is militarized, then it really militates against women. And for all the reasons people have been saying, we need human being voices to be telling us human beings stories about ourselves to inspire ourselves and things like this. So my main takeaway thought from this is that somehow we need to focus on demilitarizing film production because men hate it too. It's not all about being soft and feminine and having families and things like that. It's about being able to be fully functional human beings. We're not killing people, we're telling stories.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I think we can summarize a lot of this discussion by saying we need the change in paradigm. And that's something at which we're trying to look at. We know that EFAD members are also listening in and absorbing and trying to see how to make this industry more human, more gender balanced, more balanced in general. So let's continue doing that. And we're already well over the time, but I'd like to thank all of our partners and co-organizers, and of course the leads of the study, Fabienne, Elena, but also Gilles, and all the speakers and all of the attendees. This discussion will be available online in a few days, and don't hesitate to eventually rewatch it. It will be also available in with the translation necessary. And I don't know, Daphne, if you want to say a last word before we log off.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank the interpreters for their work, and thank you to everyone and all the project partners, like all the organizations behind this meeting. I think it is very, very much needed, and we have to continue and see you next year for the 7th edition, and hopefully numbers will be a bit better next year. Let's hope. Have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.